November 1910. A private rail car waits on a siding in New Jersey, hitched to the back of a southbound train. The men boarding it have been told not to dine together in public that night, not to use their last names, to arrive one by one as unobtrusively as possible, so no reporter can put them in the same place. They say they are going on a duck hunting trip. They are not. Inside that rail car sit the Republican leader of the Senate, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and some of the most powerful bankers in the United States. In a few hours, they will disappear to a private island off the coast of Georgia, owned by a club whose members include Rockefellers, Morgans, and their peers. They will spend a secret week there, designing a new kind of institution. 3 years later, it will be law. Today, it quietly steers the value of your savings, the cost of your mortgage, and the size of America's national debt. This is the story of the Jekyll Island meeting, the origin story of the Federal Reserve, and the moment some people say America's money stopped belonging to Congress and started belonging to an invisible committee. In 1907, the United States financial system almost snapped. A failed attempt to corner the market in copper triggered runs on New York trust companies. Banks failed. Stock prices collapsed. There was no central bank, no lender of last resort. When panic hit, the United States turned not to Washington, but to one man, J.P. Morgan. He locked the city's top bankers in his library, forced them to inspect each other's books, and bullied them into a private bailout of the system. The message was obvious. The country's money lived or died on the decisions of a handful of Wall Street men. Congress knew it could not rely on one aging financier forever. In 1908, it passed the Aldrich Plan Act, creating the National Monetary Commission, chaired by Senator Nelson W. Aldrich of Rhode Island. Aldrich spent years traveling through Europe, studying the Bank of England, the Reichsbank, and other central banks. He collected volumes of reports. But by late 1910, he still did not have a detailed, workable plan. So he did something that would become legend. He invited a small group of bankers and officials to help write one in private. The island they chose was Jekyll Island, Georgia. At the time, it was home to the Jekyll Island Club, a winter retreat for some of the richest families in America: Morgans, Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, Astors. On that November night, the invitation list looked like this: Nelson W. Aldrich, Senate Republican leader and chair of the Monetary Commission. A. Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Frank A. Vanderlip, President of the National City Bank of New York, the biggest bank in the country. Henry P. Davison, Senior Partner at J.P. Morgan and Company. Benjamin Strong, head of Bankers Trust, was part of the same inner circle of New York finance, even though historians still debate whether he was physically present at Jekyll Island. Paul M. Warburg, partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, a German-born banker who had studied European central banks in detail. Everyone understood the need for secrecy. America had already twice fought bitter political battles over national banks, and central bank was almost a dirty word. Being seen openly drafting one with Wall Street bankers would have been political suicide for Aldrich. Years later, Vanderlip recalled, "I was as secret, indeed as furtive, as any conspirator. We were told to leave our last names behind us. We were instructed to come one at a time. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. Once they reached the island, there were no reporters, no staff from Washington, no formal minutes. For about a week, the world's most important banking reform was shaped in a hunting lodge under a fake cover story. To understand what they were trying to build, you have to understand what was broken. At the time, America's money was a patchwork. Thousands of private banks issued deposits. National bank currency was tied to government bonds, which meant the supply of money did not expand when the economy needed it most. Every few years, a scare would hit. Depositors would rush to pull cash. Banks, desperate for reserves, would call in loans, dump assets, or simply close. And each time, the same small circle of New York financiers was forced to decide who would be saved and who would be allowed to fail. Reformers across the spectrum, including agrarian populists, progressives, and Wall Street bankers, agreed on one thing. This system was unstable. They did not agree on who should run the replacement. The Jekyll Island Group represented one side, large money center banks and the Republican leadership that historically aligned with them. Their goal was clear: create a Central Reserve Association that could issue elastic currency and act as lender of last resort, but ensure that bankers, not elected politicians, retained day-to-day control. Over that week, they drafted the bones of what became known as the Aldrich Plan, a National Reserve Association with regional branches, owned and run by member banks. A governing board dominated by bankers with only limited government representation. A single nationwide currency issued by this association, backed by gold and commercial paper. Warburg later said the rough draft had been agreed upon at Jekyll Island. They left the island with a legislative blueprint ready to be introduced in Congress. No journalists had seen them there. No public hearings had shaped the draft. It was, by design, a proposal written by a handful of men who stood to gain from stabilizing finance on terms they could live with. Do you think the Fed's creation was a necessary reform, or the moment America's money was quietly captured? Like the video if you think more people need to hear this side of the story, and subscribe for more deep dives into how money and power really work. In January 1912, the Aldrich Plan was introduced in the Senate. The timing could not have been worse. By then, public anger at Wall Street was peaking. A House subcommittee led by Representative Arsene Pujo of Louisiana was in the middle of an explosive investigation into the so-called money trust, a small group of New York banks and trusts accused of controlling the nation's credit. The Pujo Committee's hearings painted a stark picture: a web of interlocking directorates connecting major banks and corporations, and a heavy concentration of financial power in a few institutions centered on J.P. Morgan and Company. Against that backdrop, a bill that would hand a new central institution to almost exactly the same circle of banks was politically radioactive. The Democratic Party platform of 1912 explicitly condemned the Aldrich Plan as a central bank controlled by private interests. Then the political map flipped. Woodrow Wilson won the presidency. Democrats took both houses of Congress. Any chance of passing the Aldrich Plan as written was gone. But the problem the Jekyll Island Group had tried to solve was still there. The United States still needed a lender of last resort. It still needed an elastic currency that could expand and contract with the seasons and the cycle. So the work did not stop. It shifted. In the House, Representative Carter Glass of Virginia, and in the Senate, Robert L. Owen of Oklahoma. Both Democrats, both determined not to hand Wall Street a central bank on its own terms. Their Glass-Owen bill kept many of the mechanisms of the Aldrich design: regional reserve banks, the ability to rediscount commercial paper, a central body to set policy. It preserved key regional structures, but it changed the governance. Instead of one National Reserve Association, there would be 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. These banks would indeed be owned by member banks, but they would be supervised by a Federal Reserve Board in Washington, a public body whose members were appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. This made the system, in form, public and subject to political appointment. The new currency, Federal Reserve notes, would be obligations of the U.S. government, backed by gold and eligible assets, not just private liabilities. Wilson himself pushed back against attempts by bankers like Vanderlip to tilt the bill back toward private control. Banker-friendly amendments were defeated. Paul Warburg, one of the Jekyll Island architects, later admitted that, brushing aside external differences, the kernels of the Aldrich Plan and the Glass-Owen Act were closely related. In other words, the shell changed. The core mechanics did not. On December 23, 1913, Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. America now had a central bank, not fully public, not fully private, but something in between. So did that secret meeting hand control of the money supply to a private cartel? The answer depends on what you focus on. Legally, the Fed is a creature of Congress. Congress can amend or repeal the Federal Reserve Act. The Board of Governors in Washington is a federal agency. Its members are presidential appointees confirmed by the Senate. The regional Federal Reserve banks are corporations whose stock is owned by member banks, but that stock cannot be traded or sold, and profits beyond a fixed dividend are returned to the U.S. Treasury. In practice, private banks do have seats on regional Fed bank boards. The New York Fed, historically the most powerful regional bank, sits at the core of market operations. And the Federal Reserve, not Congress, now makes the day-to-day decisions about interest rates, balance sheet expansion, and crisis lending. Power over money moved from scattered private banks and occasional congressional interventions to a centralized, technocratic structure born from ideas drafted in secret by bankers and their allies, then modified in public by elected officials. It is not literally a foreign-owned private cartel standing above the government. Contrary to some later claims, there is no primary evidence that Rothschild partners sat at the Jekyll Island table, or that the Fed is a foreign-owned institution outside U.S. law. The reality is a domestically created hybrid that still concentrates power in narrow hands. It is a hybrid: public law, private ownership at the regional level, and a great deal of independence in the middle. But the basic architecture, regional banks, rediscounting, and elastic currency, came from that week on Jekyll Island. Once the Fed existed, its fingerprints began to appear on history. It helped finance World War I, channeling credit to the Treasury and Allied governments. In the 1920s, it presided over an era of rapid credit expansion and stock market speculation. From 1929 to 1933, its choices about interest rates and bank rescues, or the lack of them, would be fiercely criticized by later economists and commissions as deepening the Great Depression. Supporters say, without the Fed, panics like 1907 would have become common, and modern crisis responses like those in 2008 and 2020 would have been impossible. Critics say with the Fed, credit booms can grow much larger, and rescues of big institutions create moral hazard, shielding the financial elite from the consequences of their own bets. Both sides are, in a way, arguing about the legacy of that railcar and that island. The psychology behind the Jekyll Island story is simple and powerful. We do not like the idea that something as fundamental as money can be redesigned by 6 or 7 men meeting in private under a fake cover story. We do not like being told trust the experts when those experts have direct ties to the same firms they are supposed to oversee. And we do not like learning, after the fact, that the compromise solution, the Glass-Owen Act, still carried the DNA of the original banker-written plan. it feels less like a democratic debate and more like rebranding. That is why Jekyll Island lives on in documentaries, books, and forums. Not because the meeting is a myth, but because it is real. The secrecy is documented by one of the participants. The outline of the plan is in the legislative record. The parallels between the Aldrich blueprint and the final Fed structure have been noted by both admirers and critics. You do not need invented characters or hidden foreign owners to see why people call it the secret meeting that chained America's money to Wall Street. The truth is uncomfortable enough. A century later, the Federal Reserve sits at the center of almost every major economic story. It decides when to raise or cut interest rates. It expands or shrinks its balance sheet by trillions of dollars, buying and selling government bonds and other assets. Its choices shape inflation, asset prices, and the burden of public and private debt. Most people never vote for a Fed official. Most cannot name one. And almost no one has ever heard of that rail car slipping south in the dark, or the hunting lodge on a Georgia island where the first draft of this power was written. Next time you hear that independent central bankers will handle a crisis, or that the system is too complex for public debate, remember Jekyll Island. Remember that the structure we live under began not in a town hall, but on a private island. At a meeting so secret, the men there went by first names only. Who does this system protect when things go wrong? Who gets rescued? Who pays the bill? And who, exactly, was invited to that first, very quiet duck hunt? If you found this useful, hit like and subscribe so you do not miss the next story.